The best British-grown Golden Promise barley. A stone fruit-laden yeast strain. More than a metric ton of citric aroma hops. A velvety beer best drunk fresh, as close to the brewery as possible. It sounds like a hype New England IPA, right? Nah, it's a pint of landlord. Hey Beer Geeks, so last week we put the very last feature-length documentary from our Keep Cask Alive series live, and I wanted to take this moment, although we're already working on Keep Cask Alive 3, to take a pause, to look at how far we've come, and indeed to have a little chat about something really important that we haven't necessarily learned, but that we've realised perhaps other people need to learn about cask ale. So before we get deep into the topic that I want to talk about in this video, which is why we're thinking about cask ale all wrong, I just wanted to give you a little update on where we've got to with the campaign. So we've been working on Keep Cask Alive since 2021. Hey Beer Geeks, and welcome to the Craft Beer channel.
And quite possibly the biggest thing I think we've ever done.
We're on a mission to keep cask ale alive. It started as a collaboration with Fuller's Brewery, as we were trying to encourage people coming back from the COVID lockdowns and into the pubs to drink cask ale when they did. And that first series, that first 5-parter, won lots of awards. I think it changed a lot of minds. It certainly changed our minds about what we think when we think about cask ale. But it ended with this idea of trying to get UNESCO status for cask ale, in the same way that the Belgians had done for their entire beer culture. So that idea pretty much lay dormant for nearly 3 years until the UK government actually ratified the element of the UNESCO treaty that would allow us to do that. And at that point, Brad and I basically dropped every other project that we had and started work on Keep Cask Alive Series 2, which is what has just about come to an end last week. And what we did during that was not only made the documentaries, 7 of them, but we started an actual campaign. So we had our petition, which is now over 30,000 signatures to try and get us onto the Living Heritage List, which is basically the national list from which the UK government will draw and put forward items to UNESCO. And we've also started a lobbying campaign. So we now have the backing of CAMRA, of the British Beer and Pub Association, of the British Institute of Innkeeping, of SIBA, the Society for Independent Brewers, and lots of other companies that weren't sponsors of Keep Cask Alive too. So we've spoken to some of the biggest cask ale brewers who want to know how to get involved, how they can help, and lots of them are getting their pubs to sign up to this petition. The petition, to be fair, has slightly stalled at around, I think it's about 33,000 as I'm recording this. But that's okay. Like, it would be great to hit 100,000 by the deadline on the 1st of October, and we've got plans at the Great British Beer Festival and some other things to try and help that along. But to be honest, the petition has actually done its job. So I'm actually now in pretty regular communication with lawyers and with people in the government in various departments, including DEFRA, Department for Media and Culture, about our pitch, both to the national list and indeed to UNESCO. And lots of those people really want to back it. And I'm sure that loads and loads of campaigns get that kind of interaction. Government always wants to do things and finds ways not to do it. So we're still going to have to keep that up. But the real campaign now, which started with trying to get on that Living Heritage List, is about trying to encourage the government to put not just cask ale forward to UNESCO, which it will eventually, I think, but to do it as soon as possible, because the government is planning to spend a couple of years without submitting anything to UNESCO. So that's where our lobbying campaign is. So it's really important to sign that petition. You can do so below, but it's also really important to email your MP, to put up posters in your pub, and to try and get a groundswell of support that will allow us to go to the government saying it's almost now or never for pubs. And so we come to what I want to talk about in this video, which is a thought that has been sort of gestating in Brad and in me for a couple of years, ever since we started this campaign. And it's the way that we think about and define cask ale, and perhaps even more importantly, the way that it is thought about and defined outside of the sort of the beer geek industry. Because I really do think, and that's why we've gone for UNESCO so hard for this particular campaign, that the way that we frame cask ale is absolutely key to its survival. So being part of this campaign, lobbying to the government, talking to lawyers, talking to researchers within the beer industry, has really hammered home the fact that cask ale and craft beer, craft ale, craft keg ale, whatever it is, are kept so separate in terms of the research that's done, in terms of the conversations that are had, in terms of the lobbying that is done by businesses, by lobbying firms, by groups like CAMRA and SIBA. And it's a really deeply unhelpful division to have made, because although Camera maybe 10 years ago would have said that these two things are polar opposites and almost eating each other, we now know that that's really not the case. Actually, craft beer has kind of helped cask ale in many, many ways. And actually, the approaches to brewing them are incredibly, incredibly similar. And so when we talk about the interests of these two things, really, they have the same interests. So we've seen it throughout all of the research that's done by research companies in the alcohol space, this separation of craft beer, which is sort of places this super, super premium above premium lagers that are actually very rarely premium beers, and cask ale, which is kind of seen as a non-premium product. It's certainly not priced as a premium product, and it's almost seen, I think, by researchers as a bit of a curiosity. They can't quite work out why it still exists, why it's still not died. But we're also seeing it in the comments on the YouTube channel, both on Keep Cask Alive 1, Keep Cask Alive 2, and the feature-length documentaries that we've done afterwards on individual breweries. There's the classics, which we know and expect around sort of the idea that cask ale is flat and warm. It's neither. If you think it's warm, it's roughly the temperature of the English Channel. If you think that's warm, go have a swim in it. It's certainly not flat, or it shouldn't be flat. There should be lots of lively carbonation there. Ideas around it, you know, it being boring, and that's just subjective. You might not enjoy bitter or porter as a style on cask. And also some kind of cliches around who drinks it or who it's marketed to, the latter of which I completely accept. But the one that really caused me to stop and think is this idea, and there were a couple of these comments saying that they didn't understand why the craft beer channel was covering cask ale. Now, I said a couple of times on the channel in the last couple of years that I wish we'd never called it the craft beer channel, because although we have a definition for craft that we love, and in fact a brewery even put it on their wall at the tap room. It was Unity Brewing in Southampton, sadly no longer with us. And our definition is craft beer is brewed with the intention of putting flavour and process above cost. It can be innovative or traditional, served in any format, and does not have to come from an independent or small brewery. But it must not damage the industry's reputation or any other brewery's freedom to produce beer to the best of its ability. So Brad sort of summarises that really nicely quite often. He says that it's a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. So of course, a craft beer channel with that definition should cover cask ale. But still, in the minds of drinkers, there is craft beer, which is, you know, modern, exciting, innovative, increasingly less so, but still quite cool, and ever-changing. And then in their minds, they have cask ale, which is seen as old-fashioned, fusty, unreliable, boring. And what we've learned through making these documentaries is that that cliche holds really strong in the minds of beer geeks and the general public, but that it couldn't be further removed from the truth. And it's something that I know that Camera really battles with, this absurd reputation that cask ale has built for itself. It's largely its own fault, of it being for older white guys who can't, you know, necessarily let go of what it was like in the 60s and 70s. And I really think that even when it comes to those people, that's not how they see it or why they consume it or any kind of motivation. What they're trying to do is protect this glorious heritage that we have here in the UK that's entirely unique to the UK, and also they're trying to protect what in their day, what 40, 50 years ago was craft beer. Cask ale was this almost, you know, counter-revolution that was happening as keg beer started to take over, sort of the lagers, the red barrels, the sort of kegged ales. This was their revolution, right? This was not necessarily modern, but it was certainly exciting. It was varied. It was, you know, interesting. It was a race to the top. It was about producing the absolute best beers that you could. It was about producing unusual beers and flavours. And we can still see that. The breweries that have survived the great consolidation of the 60s and 70s still produce really diverse beer, in many cases more diverse than the craft beers that we consider innovative and exciting. You look at Harvey's, where, you know, we mostly talked about best, but the amount of beers that are made at Harvey's is staggering, and the variation in recipe is staggering as well, and the way that they pull on both modern and historic beer styles and inspirations, all while using, you know, pretty much exclusively English ingredients, probably pulled from the nearest 60 miles, is about as innovative as you can really get in brewing. So that's why we started this video with a slightly cheesy reveal of a beer, making it look like it might be a New England IPA, although very few New England IPA producers are using whole cone. And then obviously revealing that it was Timothy Taylor's Landlord, because, you know, I was blown away by the similarities between making a New England IPA and making Timothy Taylor's Landlord. In fact, the two breweries that used the most golden promise, which is this lovely, as we talked about in the documentary, sort of juicy, full-bodied malt, the two breweries that use the most of that are Timothy Taylor's and Verdant. Also, no other beer style really involves using that much hop matter in the whirlpool than New England IPA and, well, British bitters. So it's mad to me that one is considered craft and exciting and modern and the best beer can be, and the other one is to some extent considered boring and old-fashioned. So many of the techniques, so many of the ideas, so many of the ingredients that go into modern craft keg brewing are not new ideas. It's very hard to have a new idea in brewing now. You can see that by all the endless IPAs that come out that are just slight rehashes of the one that came before it. New ideas are hard to find, and most of them have come from British or Belgian or German or Czech style brewing. It's already been done, and the only thing that's new is the combination that you put together to create something that potentially hasn't fully been tasted before. To some extent, the craft beer industry has kind of co-opted and bastardized the idea of a craft. You know, outside of the beer industry, a craft is considered something that you know, perhaps it's a unique approach to doing something that you have honed over decades or centuries, and you continue to do even as perhaps, you know, capitalism, Fordism, whatever process it is that's all essentially the same when it boils down, tries to take that kind of longer-winded, more artistic, more hands-on process away. So if we're talking about craft in terms of, I don't know, woodwork, in terms of painting, in terms of building, it's always got this historical element. And yet in craft beer, we've tried to strip that away for some reason. And that is what I really, really want to get across to people. This idea that there isn't really anything more craft than using processes and producing styles that have been around for potentially centuries. Holding on to that heritage, those processes, that hands-on approach. You know, you look at just how much beer you can see at Harvey's Brewery, how much splashing is happening, how many different vessels are being used, how many different materials are used throughout that brewery compared to, you know, the stainless steel cathedrals of craft and of macro brewing. And you see that there is incredible craft going there, incredible care. There's even craft just going into maintaining these bits of equipment. And increasingly that is more exciting and more kind of related to any notion of craft that I have. So what am I trying to say? I guess what I'm trying to say is that over the last 4 years, what we've learned is that cask ale cannot be divided from the idea of craft beer. It is exciting, it is innovative, but it has a heritage element. And I really want everybody at home that's watching this, or has watched the series, or is just thinking about beer, reading about beer, to just consider this idea that craft is not a segment, right? Researchers, craft is not a segment. It is an approach to brewing that can apply to, you know, the biggest macro beer. It can apply to Pilsner Urquell and maybe Kozel and Budvar, all these really big sort of Czech breweries, certainly some of the Helles producers in Munich, Augustina, Paulaner, but it can also apply to a tiny New England IPA producer in the Pacific Northwest, and it also 100% applies to Harvey's, because they are all taking that same approach of essentially trying to do a race to the top, trying to make the best beer that they can. And so I think it's deeply unhelpful when researchers segment it out, when drinkers segment it out. I really wish that everybody that walks into a bar, or I should say a pub, doesn't look at the kegs and the casks. They just look at all of it across and go, well, which beer do I want to drink today? So the issue in Brad and my mind now is that if we continue to keep cask and craft separate, it's going to be really, really hard for cask ale to rescue the reputation that it has. And it's really important that we start to include cask ale in any definitions and in any conversations we have around exciting, modern or traditional brewing. So I implore you, when you're using the term craft, to include cask within it. I implore you, when your friends go into the bar, to say, hey, let's take a look at the cask and the keg taps. And I also implore you, if you work in the industry, to not really take at face value the data that we're seeing. I think that a rise in craft beer is also a boon for cask ale and also the other way round, and we need to ensure that both of these camps get the things that they need, which is support from the UK government, it is recognition from places like UNESCO, and it is the love and adoration of people who love beer. So we need to remove any kind of prejudice around cask ale if we can, and that's a job for the cask ale industry and the craft beer industry, which are the same thing, but it's also a job for us when we have these discussions, when we think about it, and when we want to try something new. So this weekend, as this video goes live, is going to be London Craft Beer Festival. There's going to be some cask ale producers there, people like 5 Points and Timothy Taylor's, and I will absolutely be going there as well as going for a mad pastry stout, because when all of these things come together, everybody wins.